What You Think series. So last week was Strength Through Weakness, talking about our weaknesses, and then today is The Way Up is Down. So it's, again, we're going to go through something that's probably familiar to you in lessons you've heard or messages you've preached, and even reading God's Word yourself and coming across these things. But with we'll just read the couple verses here, and then I'll get into it. So 1 Peter chapter 5, verses number 5 and 6. The Bible says, "Likewise, ye younger, submit yourselves unto the elder. Yea, all of you be subject one to another, and be clothed with humility. For God resisteth the proud, and giveth grace to the humble. Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you in due time." So I know Brother Jet talked a little bit about God stiff-arming you even on Wednesday night. And that thought there of God resisting the proud is literally that he puts his hand out and keeps you at a distance with pride. And the thing is, with pride, man, I always forget to click over to the verse until it's done, and then it's like, well, we'll just move right past it. Pride is possibly the one sin that you could say is at the center of every other sin issue we have in our life. Pride is a big one. It might be the center of everything that we deal with, everything we struggle with, that's negative. And for us as humans, Christians, we know we're supposed to be humble. We know we're not everything, right? We know that we deserve hell. We know that we're sinners, and we know we're only saved because of what Jesus did for us. And we know that even our righteousness, right, the good things we do is like filthy rags. So as Christians, we know these things, but we still are human, and we still, at least I, find myself not necessarily living in a way that is consistent with that mindset of understanding that without Jesus, we're nothing. And so a lot of that, again, comes back to pride, and we convince ourselves and everyone around us that we're, we would never say this out loud, but that we're better and that we're smarter than most other people around us. Not us in this room. All of us are on level, right? We're all equal. But them out there, we're smarter than them. We're better than them. We are wiser. We're more common sense, right? We understand the gospel even, which makes us better, right? And as human beings, that's kind of our natural tendency, even again, as Christians, to think that we are superior. And again, we would never say it that way because we know that sounds bad and that is prideful, but we live that way and we can think that way within ourselves. And even success and greatness in the world is only achieved by lifting yourself up. And if you're in a corporate world, man, you want to promote yourself and why you're better than everyone else, why your skills are better, why you are the one that should get the raise, you're the one that should get the office, you're the one that should get, the superiority because of what you have done. And we do that in our jobs in order to, ascend the ladder and to get paid better and just to be the best that's there. And that's a normal thing to work hard and to do your best. We definitely should do that. But that seems to be how even our thought process is, well, I'm better than that person. That's why I deserve it over them. Even as good Sunday school attending Christians, right, we know those thoughts take us to pride. And we know we shouldn't have those thoughts. But even though we know we shouldn't do that, it's very easy, if we're honest with ourselves, to find ourselves there and to thinking that way and even acting that way. You just take yourself driving 5:30 on any given day around here, and you go home from work and you're on 229 or you're on 41st, and all those other idiot drivers, right, that don't know how to drive as good as you do, right? You're the one doing the right thing, using your turn signal, going the right speed. If those guys are idiots driving too fast or too slow, right, not using their turn signals, you're superior than them. Even, in Hy-Vee, right, the people that are not aware of their surroundings, unlike us, where we understand with the cart, you go on the right side of the aisle. You don't stand in the middle this way and stand looking at the thing while there are people coming. Like, that. You don't do that. But those people do. Those are not, you're superior to them. We are, because you're aware. It's because you're kind. It's not because you're prideful that you think that way. It's because you're being aware of others. You're actually thinking about others by doing the right thing in the aisles at Hy-Vee, right? You don't block the aisle, right? And if we're not careful, we will develop a superiority complex. even in those small little instances, and we laugh because we all do that. And then we could pick many other circumstances, and I will talk about some within our home with our spouses later, but we can pick other circumstances where we are better than other people, and we know more. We're smarter. We have more common sense. It's not that we think that we're better than them overall, but we're smarter than them. We act better than they do. Maybe our behavior is more acceptable in culture than theirs is. They just haven't been learned well, right? Unlike us. And we can develop a superiority complex with the people around us and see people in that way, see people in that light. And we'll talk about why, obviously, we want to look at them in a different way. But superiority or greatness in God's eyes is not you're the smarter one, you're the more aware one, you're the more conscientious person. But the greatness and superiority in God's eyes are those that are humble, those that understand. Even though I might know how to go down the aisles of Hy-Vee, I'm really not that great of a person still. And maybe I do those things because I realize that I'm not that great of a person, not because I am so superior. And the word humble just means to make yourself low, to have a modest opinion of yourself. And again, Christians, we know we should be humble and have a modest opinion of ourselves, but we have a pretty high opinion of ourselves most of the time. And then sometimes we can even do the self-deprecating thing where we have such a low opinion of ourselves, but we think about ourselves more than anything else to the point where I'm nobody, oh, woe is me type of humility. And that's not the humility God's looking for either. But God wants us to understand our position, right, with him and within who we actually are. James 4:10 says, humble yourselves in the sight of God, and he shall lift you up, right? And that is what the Lord wants to do. God has the power to make one truly great, right? God is the only one that has that ability. He lifted up Joshua, right, after Moses' death. Joshua was put into that position of leadership, not because he thought he was superior, but because God lifted him up. Even Saul, when he became king, if you go to 1 Samuel 15, it talks about how Saul thought he was not anybody. He thought low of himself, and that is when God made him king. And then we talked about David. David was exalted from a humble shepherd, right, to being king. So all these times where God has taken individuals who thought lowly of themselves, not in a self-deprecating way, but understanding their position, were humble, and God used their humility to put them in positions of greatness and superiority, right? In order to make an impact, which hopefully we all want to, right? We want to make an impact for Christ. We want to do something with our lives on this earth that impact eternity, right? And there's a lot of areas that can apply to within our homes, with our kids, with the people we work with life in general within this church. Hopefully we all want that. We all want to make an impact. In order to do that, we need God's favor, right? We need his help to do that. And that comes through humility. God uses those that are humble. So how do we make ourselves humble? And Pastor has said this to me many times. And that's it. Just every time I go to preach, or every time that there's something that God wants you to do, just get low. Just get low. Bring yourself down. Understand your position. Get low. And I thought that it came to my mind many times as I studied for this, Pastor saying, just get low. And then if you have that thought process and understanding what that means, God will use you because of that. So how do we humble ourselves? A couple ways. We humble ourselves by looking up, right? And what that means is that we look at what Jesus did, right? Looking at Jesus was the perfect example of humility. You can go through all the Gospels and see all the times where he was humble in his life here on this earth. But if we go back to thinking about who Jesus is, right? He's God. And where he was before he came to earth, he was on the right hand of God's throne, right? He was in heaven. He's the ruler of the universe, the creator of everything. And think about the humility that is required to wrap yourself in your creation and become as one of your creation, and come down and humble himself to become as his creation. And we know that. And I think I gloss over it. It's like, understand, yes, Jesus came to earth. He lived on earth for 30 some years. Perfect life. He is great. died, sacrificed, rose again. We just kind of like ramble through it. But think about the humility that is required for God to become us. And he didn't come in the 21st century where things were comfortable and easy, right? He came in a time where, man, life was hard, really hard. And he came into a nation that was going through a difficult time, right? And the time that he came was perfect and worked exactly as he planned. But think about what that meant for God to do that. Then, not only did he come and become his creation, then he allowed his creation to kill him, to treat him as humans did, as God. Think of the humility that requires. And he allowed his creation to kill him in order for his creation that killed him to have salvation. I mean, we know this. We're all saved. We understand that. But if we really think about the humility that requires of God to do that, it's mind-blowing. So anytime you think you're awesome, anytime you think you're superior, just think about that, and that'll take that away in a heartbeat. And so to be humble, we need to look at what Jesus did. And then in his life, he gave examples of humility. You're right? He washed his disciples' feet. He lived a life of humility, right? No one could ever be more humble than he was. No one could ever humble themselves more than Jesus did. And he was God. He had much further to go. We're already pretty low on the totem pole of awesomeness, right? And we have a hard time humbling ourselves. But God at the top was able to come down and humble himself. So you just look at what Jesus did, and it'll bring humility to your heart. Look at what Jesus said, right? You can tell prideful people by what they say, who they talk about. And we can fall into that trap. If you find yourself talking about yourself all the time, if you find that that's the topic of conversation, I mean, when you have a conversation with people and you're just like, and all it is about them, good. It could be promoting all the things that they're doing or all the bad things they're at, but it's about them. It's where your focus is, right? Jesus, everything his focus was back to his Father. And we won't take the time, but all the way from John 5, there's multiple verses, 5, 19, 30, 41, where Jesus talks about, it's not about me, it's about my Father. I'm not exalting myself, it's the Lord that exalts me. So I'm here to do God's work, I'm here to do my Father's will, and it's not about me, it's about him. And again, he was God. So if anyone could say, yeah, it is about me, he could have said that. He could have talked about that. But he didn't focus on himself. He focused on what his Father wanted. And he focused on people. Right? He focused on his disciples, growing them, preparing them. He focused on the publicans, the sinners. He focused on spreading the message that he was the Messiah to other people, and then healing people, making a difference in their lives. Now think about, to Jesus, their lives are, when God looks at time, our minds can't comprehend it, but time really doesn't matter to him, right? So when he healed that blind man, to Jesus, the amount of time that blind man lived after being healed it's so small, it really doesn't matter. Again, our whole lives are a vapor. But to that blind man, it changed his life. Right, the life that he had on this earth. I mean, you think about us and the life that we live. Say we live 80 years. You could do the math on how much time you got left. Right, to Jesus and to God, that's nothing. It's the time is so quick. But to us, it's our whole life. And Jesus spent time making difference in people's lives to that effect where their life was drastically changed. That's what he spent his time talking about. That's what he spent his time doing. Was focusing on his Father and focusing on other people. We focus on ourselves. I'm not going to put a percentage to it, but we focus on ourselves probably a higher percentage than anything else. Now we go to church and we hear preaching, so we know others are important. So we serve, right? We do bus routes, we do Sunday school, we help in areas, we do the nursery, we serve and we think about others, probably a higher percentage than most humanity, but it's probably still about that big compared to how much we focus on me, right? I worry my day-to-day is my job. my tasks, my financial situation, my bills, my health, my family's health, right? That's where a big percentage of our focus goes, is on us. We seek, even in a maybe could be seen negative way, we seek our own glory. We seek ourselves to come out on top. We seek ourselves to be more comfortable, to have fun, to have pleasure, to be in a situation where life is easy and comfortable. We seek our own glory. Jesus sought his Father's glory. He wasn't concerned about his glory. He wasn't concerned about even his comfort or any of that. It was all about his Father and other people. So when we look at Jesus and the things that he did, that'll help us be humble. We think, even as human beings, we think we deserve credit and praise for even the smallest things. And we'll get upset if we don't receive praise and credit for the smallest things. For example, when the laundry goes in the basket, guys, we expect credit for that. I didn't put it next to it. I put it in. I even lifted the lid and put it in. Hello, praise, come credit. Credit where credit is due. I did what I was supposed to do. I did what I'm thinking of you. Right? Wife, I'm thinking of you. So you don't have to bend down and pick up my dirty clothes. I did it for you. You're welcome. Right? That is what we expect as human beings. The dishes are in the dishwasher, not the sink. I'm not letting that pan soak, even though it needs to. Probably should soak overnight. But I took care of it right away. Cleaned it out right away. We expect that kind of recognition in those things. Right? The lights, right? Wives now, okay? Husband, I turned the light off in that room where nobody is. That room is unoccupied. It will be unoccupied for hours, and I turned the light off. You should be thanking me for turning that light off, right? I shut the door. So we aren't born in barns. I shut the door. I realized I was born in a hospital, so I shut the door. The air conditioning is not flowing out. You're welcome, husband, right? I did. Here's a good one. Maybe this is just at my house. I don't know. You tell me. I took the boxes, not just from the kitchen, threw it into the garage, but I took it out of the garage and I put it in the trash. I put it in the recycle. I didn't just take the box, open the garage door and go, boom, throw it there, done. No, I took it all the way to the dumpster, all the way to the trash. You're welcome, husband. You should be thanking me and praising me for those things. Right? We become upset when our contributions go unnoticed. Right? And those are silly, funny things that we all, have. You have your own thing in your own home that you know exactly what it is. And maybe those are my examples. I don't know. They could just be random. But when we don't get noticed for the contributions we make, whether they're tiny, small like that, or if they are significant in our eyes, at work or here, right, in other places, when our contributions go unnoticed, we get offended. We get hurt. And that's because it's about us. It's because, did you see what I did? Why are you not recognizing what I did? I did something for you. I sacrificed for you. And why aren't you recognizing that? Now I'm hurt and I'll probably never do it again. And that is a side of pride, right? It's a sign of us. And if we realize that is us focusing on me. Even when I'm trying to serve and do something kind, really still it's about me. Because if you don't recognize it or give me the props that I feel like I deserve, well, then I'm hurt and mad about it. That's pride. Even in the way we serve, we can be prideful, right? So seeing how Jesus acted should cause us to humble ourselves and realize, man, really, you shouldn't need applause for doing things that are good for your wife, that make your wife's job easier, doing things for your husband that makes his life easier. You shouldn't be like, yes, I need that applause, I need that recognition. It should just be, I want to help out, I want to love, I want to be a servant, I will do. But that's the reason we struggle with that and why it's funny. It's because we do struggle with it. Because it's how we are. Human nature shows us. So we can humble ourselves by understanding who Jesus is, what he said, what he did. It should cause us to humble ourselves. Secondly, we can humble ourselves by looking in. Right? It's easy to see pride in others. Right? We can see it. We can find it. We see it in other people's relationships. We see it in our coworkers. We see it in the way that they behave, where they're being prideful. We see it in when we're driving. We see the pride in other people. But God doesn't tell us to point out the pride in other people. He calls us to humble ourselves, to look in and humble ourselves, right? To look at our motives, which I kind of touched on a little bit already, right? The motives, why we do our things we do. And here's the thing, when we look at our motives, we look at our hearts are deceitfully wicked. The Bible says that in Jeremiah, says it in James, it talks about it. Our hearts, because they're sinful, even after salvation, right? Our hearts are wicked. So when they say follow your heart, that is, do not follow your heart. Follow God. Follow God's heart. Don't follow your heart. Don't trust your heart. Don't trust your feelings. Don't trust your emotions. Make sure you're in tune and in line with where God wants you to be, and then follow him. Make your heart to line up to him. Don't trust where your heart is, right? Because our heart is deceitfully wicked. We are born self-centered, right? You could go down to the nursery. It's the babies don't care about anybody else but themselves. That's life, right? That's like, yes. Forgot about that for a couple of years, but it's back, yeah? But even as toddlers, right? It's all about them. You might have moments of good breakthroughs where the toddler realizes to be selfless and share, right? And say please and thank you. But in their heart, it's all about them. And hopefully as we grow in age, we realize that it's not about us. But unfortunately, a lot of times there are adults that have the same mentality of it's all about me, just like toddlers. Now, we have to mask it. We have to pretend that that's not there. Otherwise, you get ridiculed and things like that. But we still can live with that same it's all about me attitude. And our motives for doing can even be selfish, right? Adults, we can become better at hiding it, but unless we humble ourselves, it's still there, right? Self can become the motivator for what we do and even how we serve, even how we serve within the church, right? Not just at work or in the community or within your home, but being selfish even within how you serve within God's house can be a motivator if we're not careful. We can do ministry serving with a motive that's desirous of recognition, right? We can be, if I don't get recognized for the service that I do, then I feel empty with the service that I'm giving. It's not rewarding enough for me. And that's a self-focused, self-centered, prideful way of serving, right? You can do marriage selfishly. You can even do love and respect with a selfish motive, right? You can even say, I'm going to love her so that she respects me. I'm going to respect him so that he shows me love, right? We can do the things God wants us to do still with the motivation of me. And that's natural. That's like if you don't try to guard yourself and to rein yourself in and to be aware of how you're acting, that is how you will naturally act. Right? God does care about our service, and he does care about our marriage. He cares about the way our marriage functions. He deeply cares about those things. But he also cares about the motives for why you serve, why you are the husband you are, why you are the wife you are. Right? Our motive should always be love of Christ, not love of self. Right? The motives for everything you do should be because you love God, not because you love you. Now, if you filter everything, all your service, all your actions, the words you say through that thought, if you're like me, it'll change what comes out. It'll change your actions. Because if you do because you love Jesus, not because you love you, you may have the actions, the service may still be the same, but the heart behind it is more for him, not for me. And so when you don't get recognition for the little things that you do, that no one sees, you're okay with that. Because it's not about that. It's not about you, right? If you pick up the paper walking down the hallway or pick up all the nickels, because that's, what everybody wants to do that's out there right now, and you pick up the trash and you do the little things, you do the dirty works, and no one says anything to you, you didn't do it for that reason. You did it because it's God's house. You want it to be clean. You want it to be presentable. Same thing at work. If there's the thing that should be done, but it's not technically your job, but you do it anyway, and then the boss doesn't say anything or doesn't see it, you'd be like, well, I'm not going to do that anymore, right? Then you're doing it for you. But if you do it because it needs to be done, it may not be your job, but you can do it, and you do it because of that, and then that's the end of it, well, that's a good testimony, right? That's different than the way most people will react, than the proud approach they will take. So doing things, the motive to be because you love Christ, not because you need something. So be a husband, be a wife that you're supposed to be because you love Jesus. Not because your husband's not what he is supposed to be. Not because your wife isn't what she's supposed to be. But you be the one you're supposed to be because you love God. That's through all of love and respect, our teaching on that. It's to do as unto the Lord, right? You do those things as though you're doing them to the Lord. And that should be the thought behind it. It takes me out of the equation, right? When your motives are because you love the Lord, it takes me out of the equation. Look at your mind. So you look at your motives. When you look inside, look at your mind, look at your thinking. Proud people think highly of themselves. That's understandable, right? If you're proud, you're prideful, you think you're pretty hot. You think you're pretty good stuff. You put yourself at the top of the list when it comes to considerations on everything that you do in life. You are the number one consideration. Your comfort, your pleasure, your joy, whatever is what you want, that is the number one consideration. And we can do that in our marriages. We can do that in our parenting. We can do that in our service here. We can do that in our friendships. We can do that in our job, right? We can be guilty of that in every situation, right? I mean, you can take it straight all the way down to how you treat your spouse, right? If all the way to a date. Where do you go? Well, I want to go where I want to go. And, if you ask the wife where she wants to go, she has something in mind. She just says, I don't know, or I don't care. You want to go here? No. You want to go there? No. How about here? No. Why don't you just tell me where you would like to go, right? But when we do things where we are the number one consideration, that's pride. And we could get into the whole Minnesota nice thing. Well, wherever you want to go. Well, I don't care, wherever you want to go. And no one goes anywhere, right? Someone has to make the decision. And those are funny situations, but when it comes to your life, right, how do you consider you versus how we consider others? So we want to judge our thinking. Prideful people think about ourselves. Humble people think highly of God, right? And so if you go back to what Jesus did and what he said, and we filter our whole life through that, we consider things differently, right? There's that Pharisee in Luke 18 that was literally thanking God that he wasn't like this other guy. Like praying out loud. He was talking to God. The Pharisee was. He thought he was talking to God. That was his motivation, was himself. But he said, God, thank you. Thank you that I'm not like this guy. Because if I was like him. That's what this Pharisee did. And then he went on to tell God about all his righteousness. I do this. I go to church. I even go to Sunday school. I tithe. I fast. Look, God, I do all these things. Thank you. Thank you for letting me be that and not this guy over here. Meanwhile, this guy over here was praying on his face, saying, be merciful to me, a sinner. Be merciful, because he knew he was nobody. He knew he needed God. The Pharisee thought he was somebody, where even God was fortunate to have him as he was. We want to be like the publican that says, be merciful to me, I am nobody. Even if that publican fasted, went to Sunday school, gave in tithes and offerings, he still knew none of that made him anything, because I am nothing without you. So proud people think of themselves highly. Humble people think of God highly. Romans 12:3 says, for I say, through the grace given unto me, to every man that is among you, not to think himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think soberly, according as God has dealt to every man the measure of faith. It's just understanding where you are, understanding your position, and not to think like this Pharisee, so highly of yourself, as if you've arrived. And again, if anyone ever asks us that question, we would deny that we think we are at that place. We would say, no, I have definitely not arrived. I will never arrive until I get to heaven. But then we live our life and in such a way that it seems as though we do actually think that we've got it all figured out and that we're number one. So ask God to search your heart like David did. Ask God to search your mind, and then be willing to change your motives. Be willing to change your mind to focus more on Jesus and loving him and others than yourself. Because I'm going to guess, if you're like me, and you're honest in that prayer and say, God, search my heart and search my mind, you'll be like, yep, I do consider myself more highly than most everybody else. Even my spouse, even God. If we're honest with ourselves and ask God to show us, we can find areas. Maybe it's not our overall way we behave, but we'll find areas in our hearts and in our lives that it is the case, that we are the number one, and areas that we can bring ourselves into the right position. So next, so we're looking up, we're looking in, and then looking out, right? The best test of humility is our willingness to serve, right? We look to esteem others. So in Philippians 2:3, and Pastor's been going through Philippians, it tells us to esteem others better than ourselves. And the word esteem just means to regard. In other words, to think. I consider you higher than me. I consider better of you than I do of myself. Right? I want to consider you more. And you can apply this to your marriage. You should. You can apply this to this class, to the people here, to this church, to your job. You can apply this to all people around you. Jesus says to esteem others higher than ourselves. So it's not just an opinion, but it's not an opinion. It's not to pretend that you're better than me. Okay, I'm going to go along with it. Yep, you're better than me. I'm going to do things for you over me. But it's to actually believe it and live in such a way that others are more important. So that means when you're inconvenienced in order to help somebody else or to promote somebody else or to lift somebody else up, you're okay with that. You'll go through and suffer through your inconvenience in order for someone else to be better off. Right? I think a lot of times of Brother Sam, flute. And I see Brother Juan do it. I see Brother Carlos do it. I see other people do it too. You know, Sam needs help after church to get home. He's got things he's got to do. And it's an inconvenience for us to stop and to help him with his jacket, to help him get his wallet out of his bag, to make sure that he's ready to go, to call the bus if that's a need, to get him a glass of water for his sponge that he's got to do. It's inconvenient. It's a problem. And a lot of times you'll be like, oh, there's Sam, he's coming my way. All right, I'm going to go over here. I mean, that's the easy thing to do. He doesn't know. Nobody else knows. But you're like, yeah, I'm just going to avoid that situation. And that's a specific situation here at church, but that happens to us many times throughout our whole life every day. That can happen between you and your wife, you and your husband. I just pretend like it doesn't exist, and she'll take care of it on her own, or he'll take care of it on his own. Right? The word esteem, and again, this is a command. Esteem others more than yourself. It's to believe that and to think in a way that you think about them more than you. Right? The world values people by what they can get from other people. Your job might do that to you. They might value you based on your contribution. And that makes sense at a job. That makes sense. But in life, that's how people value people. That's why it's okay to get rid of children. That's why children aren't esteemed, right? That's why abortion is so rampant. It's because it's about me and what was convenient for me more than the other person, right? But God views people by how important they are to him. And how important are people to God? Well, they're the most valuable thing in the world because he died for every single person, right? He died for everybody. Every individual person is valuable to God. Every individual is made in God's image. That's value. Every single human being Jesus died for. Like he gave his life, not just for us, the superior Christians that finally understood it and got saved at some point in their life. Well, yeah, he died for us. He died for everybody. So God views people not with what they can give me, like we even do, but what he can do for them and who they are. Right? So it's about looking to esteem others and view people in that way, which will cause you to serve others. Right? It'll cause you to do. So a right attitude towards others, it'll make you have right actions towards others as well. Right? A right attitude creates right actions. There's this poem called Others, written by Charles Meggs, and maybe you've heard it before. But Lord, help me live from day to day in such a self-forgetful way that even when I kneel to pray, my prayer should be for others. Others, Lord, yes, others, let this my motto be. Help me to live for others that I may live like thee. Right? So when we see others as Jesus sees them, we will gladly serve. Rather than expect to be served, or gladly serve rather than expect recognition of service. Serve because that's what Jesus did, and to see others in that way, right? It's essential for humility to be willing to serve. Overcome whatever fears you have, overcome whatever hesitations may be there, whatever hurdles may be in the way of giving all, of putting yourself in a comfort zone that you're not comfortable with. Service is what Jesus did. When you're humble and not prideful, service is that's just how you live. You're always wanting to serve. You're always looking to others rather than looking at self. And this takes effort, because our natural state is to look for self, to consider self more than others. But pride prevents humility, and it kills it. Right? Why do Christians struggle with giving into temptations and sins for years? Pride. Why do couples refuse to get help for their marriages? Why do couples constantly bicker and fight? Pride. I don't care what the specifics are. Everybody's specifics are different, but the root cause is pride. Why do fellow church members become so offended at each other that they can't even see each other, and they avoid eye contact and can't talk to one another? Pride. Why do individuals become far from God and remain far from God with seemingly no desire to ever return? Pride. Pride prevents humility. Pride kills humility. And we give our reasons. We insert our reasons why into our marriage, why it is the way it is, why she isn't doing what she needs to do, why he's not fulfilling his responsibility. And those may be valid reasons, but the root cause is pride. And the reason we can't overcome those things is because we're unwilling to be humble. And we stick to our pride. And God says the way up, the way to be exalted, the way for things to be profitable and good and great is to be humble, is to get low. Right? I have one example here I'm going to read, and then we'll go. F.B. Meyer was a British pastor and evangelist, and he had this illustration talking about the need for humility. He said, I used to think that God's gifts were on shelves, and the taller and more we grew spiritually, the easier we'd be able to reach them, right? Those gifts. He says, but now I find that God's gifts are on shelves, one beneath another. And the lower I stoop, the more we get. So it's not about growing and becoming great, and I'm learning, I'm becoming so great, now I can do all these things for God. God, the way God works is, they're on shelves, but they're down. It's not about how awesome you are, how great you are becoming, like the Pharisee in Luke 18. It's about how humble you're willing to become, how low you're willing to go. And the more humble you become and the more understanding of your position you become, then God says, now these gifts you are able to use. Now I can use you because you have prostrated yourself. You've gotten to the point where God can use you, and that's to get low. So, the way up is down. Live a humble life. Look at Jesus, look in at your heart, and look out at others. And that's how we obtain that humility where God can use us to do great things.